discussing the use of genetic material in criminal investigations. My name is Maria Biondolillo.
My name is Alexis Mazik.
I'm Melissa LaFlame.
Mary Pruitt.
And Lilia Shivani.
I'm Jenna McIntyre.
Okay, so let's get into some background information and we can get started. Overall, a lot of the pivotal work done by the Human Genome Project allowed a better understanding of even what our DNA was made of and how the genome fit together. And that allowed eventually the analysis of individual human DNA compared to a known. So now we're able to compare samples to knowns in databases and understand how that works within larger chromosomal layouts and placements. The uniqueness of DNA was explored in various ways throughout investigatory methods, such as fingerprinting methods, and it was later developed to basing full genetic profiles off of short tandem repeats of single nucleotide polymorphisms. STR, which is single nucleotide polymorphisms, profile alleles are converted then to numerical equivalents and stored in CODIS, which stands for Combined DNA Identification System, which is a database used by law enforcement. However, this is a limited database, which can provide some issues.
So some of the pros that we are experiencing are, so we've used it to solve old cold cases. So there's been over 150 cold cases that have been solved using genetic genealogy, which just basically means using relative DNA to come up with a suspect, and then from there testing their DNA. This mostly started after the Golden State Killer, serial killer. That's when the first cold case happened and was identified. It's also, of course, identifying suspects through relatives, so genealogy, genetic genealogy. Expanding beyond the traditional police database has allowed it to be more effective and faster. So, and it's filled gaps that the police database is not able to. Identifying victims and providing closure for them. So over 120 unidentified bodies have been identified using this technique. And several cases already have been sought or figured out, whether that be negatively, like, so, wow, what's the words that I'm looking for, y'all? Been convicted and has been, what's the word I'm looking for?
Wrongly prosecuted?
Wrongly prosecuted, yes. That's what I was looking for. So sorry. Um, which we will be discussing later on.
Okay, and for the cons of the use of genetic material in criminal investigations, the first and most prominent con that we have is privacy rights and surveillances. When researching genetic material in criminal investigations, this remains one of the most prominent ones that people continue to bring up and worry about. People often wonder who has their DNA and where their DNA is going. So if anybody has ever done an Ancestry DNA kit, a 23andMe, or a heritage DNA, that DNA can be used in criminal investigations through Dragnet. But also, if you've ever gotten your fingerprints taken through background checks for work, or if you've ever been booked before and had your fingerprints taken, or if you've ever been to court and had your fingerprints taken, that can also be used in criminal cases. And where people wonder, where does this DNA go? People think that if they've done an ancestry kit before, that this DNA is just thrown away, or that if it's no use anymore, it's just disregarded. But actually, this DNA is kept in the system. And later, if law enforcement decides that they want to do a huge sample pull and pull all this DNA to help them maybe find a suspect, they can do that. And people argue that this is a violation of privacy. People also wonder about abandoned DNA versus privacy. Abandoned DNA is basically, say you had a coffee cup and you threw that coffee cup away, but then law enforcement decided that they wanted to take that coffee cup and they wanted to test the DNA on it because maybe it could help them further with their case. They are allowed to do that. And people say that this is also a huge violation of their privacy as they never agreed to that. Another big point is also volunteering to give up DNA. People argue that it's not actually volunteering and that it's a form of coercion, as people worry that if they don't agree to give up their DNA, that maybe they will face consequences or that they will be labeled as a suspect when they are innocent. The next point that I'd like to make is false positives and misinterpretation. Even though the use of genetic material is very, very, very accurate, there is still room for human error, lab error, and contamination through different transferring. And there also can be a huge misinterpretation. This comes from errors from identifying immediate family members as distant family members when they are in fact immediate family members and not distant relatives. And the last point that I would like to make is racial and socioeconomic disparities. Black and Hispanic individuals make up over 60% of incarcerated individuals in the US, but are only about 21% of the total in population. And since there is a majority of Black and Hispanic individuals already in prison, their genetic material is more available in the system than people who aren't in the system. So there is a big disparity between those who are Black and Hispanic and those who are not.
So the first case we want to bring up, I think this is kind of a case that checks all the boxes as far as where you would use genomic testing as a positive when it comes to criminal investigations. Um, I chose it because obviously it's very relevant as far as how recent it has been. But again, it checks off all those boxes of using it for a positive um, means of convicting or getting someone who truly is a bad person off the streets. So starting in beginning in the 1990s and ending in the early 2000s, this man named Rex Heerman up in Gilgo Island, up in the New York area, he was a serial killer. And as far as we know, he has 8 women that he killed to his name. In fact, just recently, as in April 8th, so 10 days ago, he pled guilty to 8 counts of murder. And one of the reasons he actually changed his plea to guilty is because the judge in his case ruled that the prosecutors could use degraded rootless hairs, which was a first in New York court. Typically, you have to have roots on a hair for that to be allowed as evidence against someone. Um, so hair was found on some of the victims, and it actually didn't link back to him. It linked back to his wife and his daughter using mitochondrial DNA. That's how they tested for that. They also had, they collected his DNA, like we had talked about just recently about discarded DNA. They had collected some of his DNA via pizza crust he had dumped out. So again, that brings up the topic of, are you actually volunteering your DNA? Is it being taken from you when typically you have to have a warrant to get someone's DNA? So his defense attorneys argued against the use of the whole genome testing on the degraded rootless hairs. They of course, are going to claim that it's not accurate enough to be used in court. And a lot of the court reporters said that as soon as the judge ruled against the defense attorneys, that that is when he decided to plead guilty because there was just a mountain of evidence against him. It's also important to note that it wasn't just DNA used against him. There was witnesses. His car had been identified, all kinds of things. He had articles about the killings in his home. So this wasn't a case of really questionable whether the right person was being charged with these pretty heinous crimes. The defense attorneys did also question the lab that was used to do the testing. I thought it was interesting when I was looking into this. There's a lot of for-profit private labs that police are using now. And that always brings into question when you have something for profit about whether it's actually doing the right thing. The article I was reading said that that lab made $130,000 off of this case alone, which is mind-boggling. Um, and that they weren't actually accredited, but they have been used in other cases. So there was a little bit of interesting things there. But All other evidence points to this guy. And again, he did plead guilty. And part of his plea agreement, which I found really fascinating, is he actually has had to agree to behavioral analysis with the FBI. So they hope to actually be able to really psychoanalyze this guy and see what makes guys like this tick.
Okay. And then I did the second case study, which basically discussed Lucas Anderson, who was a 26-year-old homeless alcoholic who had a long rep sheet of petty crimes and was arrested and charged with the murder of Ravish Kumar in San Jose in the late 2012s. When this case occurred, he states that he drinks a lot and he has no recollection of him committing the crime, but he was like, this is a possibility that he could have did it. However, his DNA was found under the victim's fingernails, and it strongly implicated him. However, he had an airtight alibi of him being hospitalized at the time of the murder. It was later found out that the DNA was transferred via paramedics who treated both Anderson and the victim who had passed away during the crime, and charges was dropped in June of 2013 after the error was discovered. So, although he wasn't convicted, it seems as though, due to him being previously booked, as one of my other members had stated, due to his fingerprints already being in the system, it made it a lot easier for him to be prosecuted for the crime compared to the people who were actually committed the crime.
In conclusion, the advancements of DNA analysis and expansion of forensic sciences have changed the way everyone is like starting to look at these criminal investigations. It made it possible for to be able to link these individuals to these cases and be able to solve these cases overall. So in the cases shown, it showed a role in being able to link these suspects to these certain crimes. And while it is a pro, because how we mentioned when we talk about the pros is how they're solving these cold cases and stuff like that. But when you think about it ethically, it's like you really sometimes don't know where your DNA is going to go. So overall, I would say forensic science is changing, and we have to just look at the way we use these modern technology, just use it ethically. And I would say it's starting to become more about just solving cases. We also have to think about using this technology responsibly as well.
Okay.